This podcast is a project of the Climate Designers Network.
This podcast was supported in part by grant funding from the U.S. Department of Education's Title IX grant program through the University of Illinois Center for Global Studies. The content of this program does not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. Hey, this is Eric. Welcome to Season 4 of Climify, where this season we want to help change the system. In this second series, we're going to be focusing on the commercial segment. Our experts in this area are focused on how our collective system is organized. We're not talking about decisions like which produce to pick at the grocery store, although these lifestyle choices are very important. Our four guests play pivotal roles in the organization of our society, disrupting the economy at the institutional level and changing how products are imagined and created. The show format is a tad different this season. Each episode is broken into 3 segments. To begin, I'll be joined by one of our researchers on Climify to break down what we both heard in my interview with our guest and what you should listen for. Our second segment is, of course, our interview, which is always still hopeful with plenty of inspiration. And finally, our third segment breaks down what we heard as calls for action in the interview itself and what you can do to change the system through climate action. Bhavna, welcome back to Climify. I'm glad you are here. I last talked to you during our episode with Halima. Fantastic interview. Today we have a really good guest, Leyla Acaroglu.
I'm really happy to be back. And about Leyla, she is huge. And it's been so exciting to be able to listen to her speak and interact with her. And for those who don't know who she is, I don't think that's too many people though. She is a huge champion of sustainability and circular economy. And she was also named the Champion of the Earth by the UNEP, which is the United Nations Environment Program. She's a main stage TED speaker. And she's also an entrepreneur, and she's a creator of the disruptive design method. And she's also the founder of the Unschool of Disruptive Design and Swivel Skills. And she's just absolutely amazing, and she has so much to say this episode, and I'm really excited to listen to her speak.
You were the one that wanted her on this season, right?
I think Cam reached out. I don't know how we got a hold of Leyla. I think it was just a public email.
Yeah, it was.
But I think Cam was doing some of the communications. And I think the day that we did the recording for Halima, once I found out it was her, and I was just like, oh my God, because I didn't even mentally register that it was Leyla.
Mm-hmm.
And we were speaking to Halima, in fact, and she specifically said that when you mentioned Leyla's coming on board and we're recording with her tomorrow, Halima was just like, oh my God, major fangirl moment. And like, do we have the questions? And you're just like, no. I was like, oh. Okay.
Not only did she book it, but she booked it like very fast.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like,
let's get ready.
We need questions.
Yeah, we need to get ready.
I also remembered as soon as she walked in, she was just like, I'm not going to be able to answer all of these questions because I talk a lot about the questions.
That is very common. You know, we write like 15 questions and we get to 7 of them, right?
We hit 4, if I'm right.
We only hit 4 of the questions?
I think so.
Oh boy.
I'm the cat gif that's just like rattling notes. And she answered about like 4 or 5 questions. No, not even 4. Yeah, exactly 4. 3.5, I think we touched.
Yeah. There was too much to talk about, I think.
It was so good.
I have been familiar with Leyla for, gosh, I don't even know how long, many, many years. She's out there in the public sphere doing the work. She is going into companies. She's going into big organizations, starting her own school because she believes so strongly in circular economy and sustainability that, I mean, she's putting it all on the line and being very successful at it. Well, what were your thoughts about this interview and in terms of what our listeners should really pay attention to.
I think without giving away too much, I would say that a lot of what she spoke about in people's daily lives is extremely relevant. So she
Mhm.
talked quite a bit about how somebody can start taking steps towards understanding their creator system. And I think how people can contribute tacitly to their environment and the systems that surround them. That could be, I mean, my opinion, probably one of the larger takeaways from this episode.
Yeah. Well, I think there were a lot, and uh, obviously, I'm in the same boat as you. I don't want to give too much away, but I really appreciated her talking about these very practical things about working, especially as a
Right.
designer, and the tensions that exist as someone coming new to the design field, someone who's been working in design for a long time, and just now having to be more focused on the climate, the sustainability, social impact in what you're making, and all of those tensions between what you know and don't know. And
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
especially as someone working for a long time, it's like, well, it works for me. Why should I stop? Right. And
Exactly.
yeah, yeah,
One more thing that I really liked about the episode was the analogies and the metaphors that she used. As someone that used to write a lot and so trying to continue writing,
you should.
uh, it was really exciting because the metaphors that she used was really visual. And I think it got me excited. It was like, okay, wow, that's how you can think about these things. And I think, secondly, and more importantly, these metaphors and analogies really give you an idea of how somebody thinks of a system and how systems can be defined very differently from person to person. And that actually gives a lot of insight in how we can go about framing our own definitions.
So it's a great transition into what is coming next, and that is our interview with Leyla. So without further ado, Leyla Acaroglu. Well, welcome, Leyla, to Climify. It's exciting to have you here. Very, very excited to finally meet you because I've been following you for quite some time. I was just checking LinkedIn, and it looks like I took one of your LinkedIn classes, and the class I took was the Circular Business Economy class.
Oh,
Super
yeah.
useful. And I shared it with my students who also
Oh,
took the
great.
class. Yes, yes. So thank you for that work.
No worries. They're really fun to do. I like props. So that one especially, we got really creative with the props.
It was really fun. And also, like, from the student perspective, all of a sudden on LinkedIn, they have a nice little certificate of completion, and that looks really good for them when they graduate.
Yeah, great.
Well, the theme of this season, I think, is one that fits you perfectly. And that's why we wanted you on the season, and that is change the system. And we ask everyone when we start these episodes what your definition of a system is, and how do you define changing that system?
Great question. Well, I come from the Donello Meadows lineage of systems thinking. So
Right.
for me, a system is a group of components that work together to achieve a particular outcome is a kind of very rigid way of explaining it. But really, a system is anything that is interconnected and interdependent. And that is everything that exists on the beautiful earth that we share. There's nothing that can function effectively without interconnection. And so it's really about the relationships that exist in order to achieve particular goals or are dysfunctional as well. Systems can be definitely created in such a way or have perverse incentives that result in, not fantastic outcomes for the different parts of the system. So we're always thinking in systems, I think, very intuitively as humans, but the system that we exist in, the economy, our education system, really likes us to be reductive and rigid and break things down into manageable parts and silos. And that is the antithesis of systems thinking, which starts with the whole, where we understand that dynamic, chaotic, beautiful interplay between things, and we seek out those relationships to understand what's happening in a system. And that gives us this insight and knowledge that helps us work within the system, not against it. And most of our big human-created systems, such as the economy, are trying to control other systems like nature, or they've got perverse incentives, like the way we have externalities and we don't account for impacts to nature, for example. And so all of these things, in my mind, come together in a kind of like symphony or dance that it's truly like magic when you start to think about systems. And it's, I think, an everyday superpower we all have, but you just have to relearn it or re-engage with it, because once you do, it's like, oh, I think this is really natural for me to be part of system, thinking in systems, identifying systems, and really then therefore being able to affect change within the systems that we're a part of. And that's really, what I see systems as: beautiful symphonies of chaos.
Beautiful symphonies of chaos. I like that. And I also like how you described in one of your talks systems as the hidden worlds around us. That was a big eureka moment for me when I listened to that, thinking, oh, that's how I'm going to describe it in class, is the things that are happening all around you.
Yeah. And look, you can get really metaphysical on this and get into the whole string theory kind of side of physics and think about
I'm into that. I'm into that.
most of the physical matter in the world around it made up of potential millions of vibrations. And so what you see in your universe or your system is not what's actually happening in others. So I mean, you can get very metaphysical, or you can also become very practical in the reality of the systems that maintain or reinforce what we are seeking to address in sustainability and climate action are hidden to us, not in the sense that there's a conspiracy to hide them. It's that they're not visually obvious, partly because of our own perception, but also partly because a lot of the mechanics that drive incentives and drive outcomes are not physically obvious. So, like I mentioned, externalities, we don't account for impacts to nature at the extraction of raw material or at the end of life, which means that the majority of the impacts that affect the planet, that then affect us, are completely hidden to us. And most of us aren't hanging out in waste sites or mining locations. We're not conceptually aware of the cause and effect relationship between our choices as designers, as consumers, as citizens, and the far-reaching, web of impacts that has on the planet around us, because we're not directly connected to those. So that's what I mean by hidden, is they're hidden from our perception ultimately. And but anything that's hidden can also be uncovered, right? So for me, system, like, it's a magic tool of kind of like, when you were a kid and you had like those books where you had a special pen and it uncovered like a
oh my gosh, yeah. I had
like
those.
that,
I used them
right?
on
Like
road trips with my
red and
parents.
the white paper, and you get some beautiful thing out of it. So it's really about seeking out those, like I said, relationships, and then uncovering the cause and effect. And in systems we talk about there's no blame because everything's interconnected, right? So you're not trying to blame part of the system, you're trying to understand it or uncover it. And from that knowledge or perspective, you can then often have enough information to be able to understand where you can insert an intervention to affect change within that system. And it's the most agency building thing to know that every individual, no matter who they are, where they live in the world, no matter what resources they have available to them, if you have this perspective and this kind of osmosis to the systems around you, you can affect those systems through your choices, because you already do, right? You do anyway affect the world around you. You just are not conscious of what those effects are.
Yeah, I think I discovered Donella Meadows in like 2016. I'm better late than never, but so I'm also from that same school as you. And I think the thing that you talked about, the hidden world around us, watching Charles and Ray Eames' Power of 10, which I show to my students because I think that is a really good way of thinking through these hidden systems, but how we're all connected.
Yeah. And the cool thing about design as well is that most design is in a practice, a
Hmm.
systems uncovering process, right? Because what we're trying to do a lot of the time in design is we're trying to connect things that make sense to people, whether that be a physical form, or whether that be a visual communication. We're trying to draw relationships. And obviously, as designers, we rely on heuristics and schematic references and like a bit of manipulation, let's be completely honest. And so we're essentially trying to create new connections between things to get a particular outcome. Unfortunately, most commercial design is selling people stuff, but a lot of design is also about achieving functionality and value. In commercial design for products or in the medical sector, a lot of it is solving problems that help fix people's
Mhm.
lives in an immediate or long-term sense. And that requires us to think about so many factors that are hidden to the everyday person. And I always think there's like a curse of being a designer. Well, certainly I find it that I'm forever analyzing the physical world around me. Like, I'm
Yeah.
thinking, why did someone do that? That makes no
Yes.
sense. Why? Like, it's like, you're like, you want to be like, I want to talk to this person about what their rationale was around this, right? You're kind of stuck in this, like, I don't know, like there's all of these extra things that you see. And if you're
Yeah.
with a non-designer and you start explaining it to them, they're often like, how do you see that? You're like,
Yeah.
my brain has been wired to identify these things. And I think, yeah, depending on what flavor of design you studied and what you work in, you have different cues. I'm more, product orientated, but also I find like wayfinding really frustrating, like
Sure.
especially
Yes.
in newer buildings where you're like, "Why did they make this so hard for me to find the thing I need to find?"
Right.
This is so infuriating,
No, I totally get that. Going to
right? Like,
restaurants,
yep.
menus, typography on menus. Oh gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, Comic Sans still makes an appearance, so that's saying
Oh,
something. I was
yes.
just gonna say, it's funny with design because I find that like designers, I mean, we are engineered this way, and because we've been taught how to think about visual and physical form and all the rest of it. But it's such an intuitive connection to systems thinking and sustainability because what we learn is essentially how to dissect the world into parts to put it back together in different ways. It's like a
Hmm.
big jigsaw. And that
Yeah.
is like the foundations of systems and sustainability, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand impacts on things. Like we understand the impact of a particular font on the visual recognition of most people. We can also extrapolate that to understanding the impact of a material choice on the natural world based on where it's come from, right? So it's
Yeah.
actually the foundations are all there. It's just that unfortunately, a lot of our education systems haven't prioritized or integrated this as a holistic way of thinking in the design profession. And also the broader design community, well, I could actually go into a number of reasons. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but essentially my 3-point kind of like pronged attack about this in the design industry is, first of all, designers are very time poor. Like the design industry is a very fast paced industry, and professional designers do not have a lot of time to adopt additional requirements that's outside of their standard brief that they're given. So looking at environmental impact or thinking about adopting a business transformation that's a circular economy and so forth is often outside of what is required of a professional designer. And so it's
Mhm.
very difficult for them to justify to their clients or their boss investing that additional time upfront, because again, there's this learning curve, and at the beginning it's quite steep, and then once you get to the top, it's all easy from there. And so we have a lot of people who are willing to do this stuff, do the work, to understand the impacts, to make better choices, but the system they're in is not enabling that. That's the first point. And the second point is that it is still a very hierarchical industry.
It is.
Design.
Yeah.
And if you're an old school, you've done the hard yards and you're in a position of leadership, you're often not wanting to let go of that hard earned power and
Yeah.
privilege you have. And your way of doing things is the way you've succeeded. And so you're not often flexible yourself in thinking, oh, you know what? For the last 30 years, I've just been making stuff out of plastic that's polluting the planet. Maybe I should consider changing that. Oh, no, I've been successful in doing it. I just
Exactly.
want to double down
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
don't want my status to be threatened. And so that creates a lot of disconnect between the kind of old guard and the new guard in design, and certainly younger designers. And when I say younger, I mean just like under 40, basically. But designers are really, really keen to see their products and services have positive impact on the world around them,
Yeah.
to use creativity as that force for good. And of course, there's a bunch of old designers into this, or certainly they get into it later in life once they've had a successful career and made a lot of money doing the bad stuff. Then they go, oh my God, seriously, the planet, what do I do? Oh my gosh, I could like convert my entire career now that I'm retired. Anyway, but the problem is that that dynamic means that there's a huge like tension between these two parts of the professional design world.
Yes.
And you've got younger designers trying to advocate for sustainability and circularity. And then you've got more established designers who are like, sure, that's a nice add-on, but it's not a core requirement. And that creates this real tension and disconnect. And then I think the third thing is skills. Like any industry, and it's not just the design industry, we are in a skills deficit when it comes to the technical elements of achieving
Mhm.
sustainability and climate action. And it's like anything. I always say you're not going to build a bridge without getting an engineer to make sure that the bridge isn't going to fall
Yeah.
down,
Yeah.
right? And that's the same. Like sustainability has technical skills. You need to be able to understand and justify decisions based on some sort of rigor and science. And there are totally amazing systems out there for doing that. But we don't have enough people equipped with those skills to be able to deliver in a cost effective way. And so then companies hire people without the skills to do the sustainability work. And it costs them this huge amount of money. And then they say, oh, it costs so much money. And it's like, well, that's because you didn't hire a skilled person who
Mhm.
could do this in a more efficient and effective way. And so filling that skills gap is super important. And that's where obviously academia comes in, but so does these kind of non-traditional ways of educating, like the LinkedIn learning and peer learning as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a nice transition into your book, Swivel to Sustainability, because you pointed out some really important things there about time. And I know working as a designer myself, trying to make changes in the workspace, I ran into those dinosaurs that you were referring to, and they didn't want to change. And so, what would you say are like the largest problem areas for businesses who are trying to or hoping to approach sustainable transformation or basic integration of some of these circular economy principles?
Yeah. Okay. So other than the skills thing, which I think is a really big reality that means that companies end up, I'm going to say wasting time, but it's not always because everything usually teaches you something. But without the right skilled people, they can often spend a significant amount of time and money trying to do things that don't necessarily get them the outcomes they need, because sustainability done well saves money and time. It does. We know
Mhm.
that over and over again. The issue is when you do it without that like strong foundational knowledge of all of the elements of what you need to do and the processes you need to follow, that means you're often kind of, blindly feeling around in the dark trying to find a flashlight to figure out where you are kind of thing. And that seems to be a big false start for a lot of companies. So you've got the companies who are kind of trying to make change, but they don't have the right skilled people. So they kind of fumble their way through, and they usually get somewhere in the end, and that's great, but they often can get caught up in some greenwashing by accident. Like, I truly think a lot of greenwashing, except for some key players who do it just for the money, I
Right.
think a lot of greenwashing is done accidentally. Like, my experience is I work with these clients and I'm having conversations and they're telling me things that they've done, and I'm like, oh no, warning signs, warning signs.
Yeah.
No, and I'm like, did you get an LCA on that? Do you actually know if those claims are valid? And they're like, oh, they're kind of like, back to you on that. And it really concerns me because they're making public claims. They've made decisions without actually having the science to back up those decisions. And that could be that they've done a great thing, or it could be they've done a terrible thing. And that
Mhm.
is problematic because they've wasted time and money and potentially lost some credibility in the process. So I think that relationship between the skills, the right people, and knowing the steps you need to take, and then potentially the fallout or consequences of that is a massive like false start for a lot of companies. But then you have ones who are just actively not interested because of the culture. I find that a lot. There's an internal culture within organizations where it's like a little bit like the dinosaur mentality. It's like, this is the way we've always made money and done things. Why should we change it now? And so there's a real resistance from perhaps the board or the senior management. And even if you've got young, creative-minded people who are trying to agitate for change, it often is quite, again, that same tension that occurs. And I love the example of like Amazon, because like maybe 6, 7 years ago, 10,000 Amazon workers signed a petition to Jeff Bezos asking for them to take action on climate change because they had no
Yeah,
actions.
I remember that.
It was basically workplace activism. They they went to the AGM. Bezos refused to accept the petition, and eventually came out a few months later and was like, I'm going to donate all this money to climate action, because obviously he looks like a complete tool. So I have this kind of stuff happening, which is incredible, but it's also so sad that that is
Mhm.
the reality of where we're at in
Yeah.
corporate culture, where these disconnected senior people are completely tone deaf on the harsh reality of climate change and the need for us to make changes. And they're treading water, literally, as it's the floods are coming, kind of thing. And so I think that cultural issue is a really big one. And I do think we're seeing it change, because you've got these leadership companies who are making those changes, and it kind of drags everybody else with them. But it's not happening at the speed or the maturity that needs to happen. And I
Mhm.
use the word maturity because there are some markets that are very mature in this space, meaning that they've gotten to the reality of what they need. It's like they've decided to go to therapy and they've accepted and they're accountable and they're putting in the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
It's like that. It is like that when you really realize that the old way of doing things was creating really negative and toxic outcomes, that you need to make changes, and that actually when you make those changes, really good things happen. You start
Yeah.
to feel better, start to, and that's a really similar analogy to what we see with these companies, because literally people become fully turned on to this in a way that their like eyes light up and they're like, this is amazing. I had no idea that I could apply my skills in this way, these existing skills I had, and now I've got this other skill and I'm like actually solving problems and I feel motivated. And then like the energy and the positivity that comes from doing this well is incredible, contagious, and also really incredible. So, it's a real tragedy that there's still those blockages that prevent unlocking that potential. And even the most kind of like hardcore kind of characters I have seen blossom through learning how to do this well, because they kind of come at it like, oh, this is not really my business, not really my thing to do. This is extra work. And then you give them the tools and they're like, oh my gosh, this is really fun. They're
Yeah,
like,
I
I
like
feel
that.
really good. And my kids don't hate me anymore because I'm not destroying the planet. It's a real So for me, I think the big challenges there are just culture, and a lot of the challenges are also structural systems and policies that just make it really hard for companies to change course, but they can always be rewritten with good leadership. And then, of course, technical skills that are lacking in the workforce, and we know that. There's great reports. LinkedIn did one that shows the green skills gap, but a lot of governments are working on fixing that by adopting curriculums or, vocational training, or even micro courses and different training systems that get people up to speed quite quickly. Yeah, and I think the other thing is this a perspective shift, because sustainability, climate action, nature, all of these things have traditionally been kind of weighed down with the old environmental,
Mhm.
like, activism frame, and therefore it creates this perception that it's a nice to do add-on, fluffy feel good. It's got these stereotypes or stigmas which are totally being rewritten in many locations. Like Europe's been very progressive in that way, but there's still a lot of people who believe it to be not for
Yeah.
them, and therefore they kind of reject it. So for me, the big thing is reframing, and reframing sustainability as an innovation opportunity because it's a parameter, and parameters are what creates innovation. So, we have this incredible opportunity to meet our needs in sustainable, regenerative, and equitable ways in the economy. And companies who do this well are going to be successful because we have resource constraints that make it a reality. And we also have changing cultural needs and, impending climate disasters that really do shift the landscape. So companies who are on that journey, who are taking it on, who are doing the work, the ones that will see out this, next kind of rocky period and be successful in the future because they'll integrate this stuff into their DNA and it'll become part of their culture and they'll be able to then, weather the storm.
Yeah, that's something where I'm thinking about your unschool, right? The unlearning of some of these tried and true methods that people are using. Can you talk about what the unschool is and how you started it?
Yeah. So the unschool is 10 this year, which is
10.
crazy.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I founded the unschool. The full name is the Unschool of Disruptive Design because of my own experiences in going through the education system all the way up to a PhD. I studied product design, then I studied sociology, then I did my PhD in industrial design. And the whole way through, I wanted to figure out how to make a positive impact in the world around me. Like
Mhm.
that was all I wanted to figure out. And I did not get given the information to do that. I had to ferret it out of people and out of different systems that were really designed to de-agentize me, to kind of contort me into the most reductive version of myself, right?
Mhm.
Like that's what a lot of education and professional development does in a really sad
It
way.
is, sadly.
And I've always been a very enthusiastic, passionate person. And when I studied design, I wanted to solve problems. When I studied sociology, I wanted to understand human problems. And when I worked in the combination of design and sustainability, I was really trying to understand the way the world worked so that we could figure out how to make it work better.
Yeah.
And, in line of Buckminster Fuller's idea of how do we make the world work better for all people, into the future, and all things, like everything we share this planet with. And so the unschool in a way was like my kind of, well, it was absolutely my fuck you to that because I felt so frustrated by the fact that the system wasn't giving me the agency to make change. And every time I tried to adopt that myself, something would pull me back into this kind of status quo. And so I was like, I think there might be other people out there who feel the same way. And I had the fortune of having gone through all that education and being a disruptive minded person. I had sought out the systems thinking. I had, learned how to do life cycle assessment. I'd done internships on environmental impact management. Like I really kind of developed a massive suite of skills. I'd become a radio journalist. So I learned how to communicate. And so I started to form what's called the disruptive design method, which involved a lot of different practical tools like understanding cognitive biases and learning how to activate your own agency and systems thinking and all these tools that I thought, well, if you put them together, these are the things we need to be teaching to get people to activate their own ability to make change in the world around us. And the more people we have doing that, the more likely it is we're going to solve some of these big complex problems. And so the Unschool was born, and it really was for a very long time, I called it an experimental knowledge lab because I just didn't know, like, would people
Yeah.
show up, like, put into this? And so in the beginning, I was like running these lunchtime sessions in New York City where I was living at this cool place called the Center for Social Innovation, and people would show up, like random different types of people. And we would do these lunchtime sessions on like how to make change and understanding cognitive biases. And so over a period of time, I refined the methodology and then I ran the first ever fellowship program in I think it was 2016 in New York. And I literally put a call out and I don't know, 100 people applied or something. And I was like, okay, there's people out there who want to.
A
And
lot
so
of
then we
people.
started and we ran these amazing, immersive 7-day experiences right up until COVID kind of killed that.
Yeah.
They were really transformative for me too. Like I would be the host of these things and it would just like full on incredible experiences of just collaboration, connection. and shared wayfinding about these topics and our own kind of ability to make change in the world around us. And so, yeah, the Unschool, we went online, in 2017 because I was really sick of teaching the same stuff over and over again in person. It was really exhausting. And thankfully that kind of helped us, what's the word, like ride out the wave of COVID. But we also
Yeah.
had a farm where we ran immersive systems-based experiences. So the Unschool's done lots of different things. It's like, it really is the community of people who come to it in different formats, online, in person. And it's really basically just trying to offer that provocation. And actually, I think in year 5, I wrote an article when we turned 5, and I was like, I want it to be obsolete by 10. So I keep thinking that now. I'm like, what do I do? Like,
Yeah.
obsolete. And the obsolescence for me was that systems would become a mainstream tool that people would use, and combined with design and sustainability, because that's the 3 pillars I based it on. And I'm pretty confident that we've helped make that happen in lots of ways. Like, I know that our provocations are being used in traditional and non-traditional educational settings all over the world. And so, yeah, I mean, who knows? Let's see. I'll see what I come up with. But yeah, it's definitely been an incredible space for making positive interventions and giving that experimental approach a space where it's like the ideas built because of the different people from all over the world. They come together and then you have these experiences that then create this new thing. And it's like, it's really transformative. So yeah, that's the Unschool. We still
Yeah.
have everything online, like hundreds of courses online, and yeah,
Yeah.
people
I
can.
saw that this morning. I saw like 2 or 3, I guess, testimonials from some of your former Unschool students. And I was pumped and I was like, I'm going to sign up. It's in person. And then I went online. Okay. It's online. So do you have
Yeah,
plans for doing in-person events, or do you already
we
do that?
did it. We did do some like we did ask people this year, and a bunch of people were like, "Yes, we definitely
Yeah.
want to do it in
Yeah.
person." But then it's really difficult to navigate right now. We're a small team. We also do a lot of other projects. Like, I have a design agency, Disrupt Design, and we take commissions, we do projects. So I don't know. I'm in the process of exploring this at the moment because I also think some things, like, they live their life and then you don't want to push the thing. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I
Yeah.
can't answer.
I get it.
Well,
I get it.
yeah, it's hard to put words to it because we ran 10 fellowships in 9 countries. The last one was in Kuching
Wow.
in Malaysia. They were incredible, really incredible. And of course, I get nostalgic about them. But the world is a different place right now. And running them again the same way, I just don't think would have the same impact.
Got it.
Right. And so that's also something really important, I think, for anyone, is like, when you've created something, when does it live in the world in a different way, and therefore it doesn't have the same. It's like products, they tire, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer that question because I still think proud of
It's a
myself.
good
But
answer. You don't know yet. You don't know. You're figuring it out.
yeah.
And you also do, as I was looking through everything that you are currently doing, a lot. You're doing a lot. And one of the things that I saw, I think it was 2023, just scrolling through LinkedIn, and speaking of changing the system, I truly love that back I think late 2023, you announced that you were going to run for the World Design Organization president. And I was really excited because, I mean, hey, you're going to be on the top, and what better way to try to get some of these ideas further ingrained into design. So truly appreciate that. And I'm guessing you're not the president. I don't know. What
I'm
happened?
definitely not the president of the
Oh
WDO.
no.
I did definitely run. Yeah, no, I mean, exactly that. I embody what I teach and what I do,
Yeah.
and I'm positively disruptive. Knowing systems and knowing where and how you can intervene in them in constructive ways is a really important kind of philosophy and practical element of what I do in all my work as a designer, as a creative, as an entrepreneur. And the WDO, the World Design Organization, it's a historical entity. It got set up in the 50s or 60s to help kind of advance industrial design around the world and set up standards and things. So it's like it's got the bones of being an organization that could really help us in this moment where it is incredibly important that design, especially industrial design that was set up to service consumerism,
Yeah.
transforms into being a tool that can meet people's needs in equitable and sustainable ways. And so I knew that the likelihood of me being elected was pretty low, and for a number of
Hmm.
reasons. One was in 66 years, they've had 2 female presidents.
Hmm.
And
Pretty low.
historically,
That's pretty
in
low.
total, only 15% of people on the board in that many years have identified as women. So that's one issue. The second was no one had ever run for president without sitting on the board before. And that was a
Hmm.
very intentional decision on my part. I'm pretty sure I would have probably been a high contender in being on the board because of my skills and all the rest of it. But I didn't want to sit on a board and not have the what I wanted was to see if there was a mandate for the design industry to make change. And by running for president, that really did put that, and running on the platform of transformation for sustainable futures, really put that as a real reality of choice that the representatives of the design community had to make. And very sadly, they did not choose that. And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, they didn't choose that for me and another candidate who I think was also running on that platform. And, I can't speak to what the mentality or the systems that were at play that got to the outcome that we did get to, but I definitely left quite disheartened by
Yeah.
some elements of the status quo. And to my points earlier, just lived through the exact experience of what it is like to try and transform and make change. And look, I think realistically, even if, the likelihood of me getting in for a number of reasons wasn't like a high like probability, but I did think that it would elevate the conversation.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
in some ways it did, but in other ways it kind of created a bit of a backlash against it, which was
Really?
really surprising to me.
Yeah, that's
Like,
surprising.
disruptive woman over there
Oh,
who
geez.
ended up going like kind of reaction. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And especially because, I've had a lot of credibility in my career. I was named Champion of the Earth by the United Nations. I've worked
I
all over the
know.
world, many of Fortune 500 companies. Like, you know, I definitely think I've got a PhD in this. It's like, so it is frustrating, and I can't speak to why the result was the way it was, but it was incredibly enlightening as well. And
Yeah.
I also felt like those people who were like into this and saw this were so like yourself, like, we're so like, thank gosh this is happening. But then the outcome was like, ooh, ow.
Ouch. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you were champion of the earth before David Attenborough.
That's true. Yeah, I like to
So
make
that means
let's
something.
be honest, David Attenborough has been a champion of the earth his entire
Yeah.
life.
True.
We just got titles at different stages.
You
And
got the title
yeah,
first, the official
but
title
Attenborough
first.
got the lifetime achievement version, which is pretty prestigious. So I just got mine for science and innovation. So he definitely wins. But I do like to make that joke because
Yes.
when he did win, I was like, yeah, I feel pretty proud of that one. Yeah, the UN issues these awards every year. They've been doing it for, I think, like 15 years now, and they have
Yeah.
6 categories. It's really where they seek out people who have been advancing different elements of transformation for the planet. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to be nominated and receive that in 2016, which was very
Congratulations.
yeah, great.
Well, in all your
Love being a
books and
champion.
talk,
I'm not a president, but I'm a champion.
yes, one day. I mean, I don't think the World Design Organization, any people on the board have 1.5 million TED Talk views like you do. So I think you have a good following and a good message, and you're a great communicator. You talked about journalism, and I think that's pretty obvious. And in your books and your talks, you talk a lot about change and creating change. And what do you recommend to, you mentioned young designers or young people in the workforce? What kind of model or starting point would you recommend to some of these folks who want to create change but are up against those forces like the World Design Organization for you?
I think the thing about change is that, it is constant. It's
Yeah.
happening all the time. It's not something that you have to like think you go, this change and no change. It's always change. It's just that sometimes it's in directions that are counterproductive or, not necessarily achieving collectively beneficial goals. And I think that each of us has absolutely the capacity to move from being a passive observer of change to an active contributor. And that depends on a number of factors, realistically, the socioeconomic position people are in, the cultural conditions, the forces that they have to battle against, whether it be racial or cultural prejudices that make it structurally difficult for certain people to be heard, be listened to, be seen, be acknowledged, be respected. And that is a real travesty, I think, right now, because so many things that we are trying to do in sustainability are actually the knowledge systems of Indigenous and First Nations peoples from all over the world. And it's like we spent a couple hundred years going down the path of industrialization and learn quickly that that's probably not the best way to exist on this planet into
Yeah.
the future. And let's just look. I know, like the Aboriginal people in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have lived for over 65,000 years sustainably on this land, and yet we culturally discredit these incredible
Mhm.
knowledge systems that help us deal with fire, that help us deal with water, that help us deal with connection and culture. And so I think that there's a real opportunity for all of us, everyone, no matter who you are, to engage with the First Nations from the lands that you are on or from. And there are some places in the world that claim they don't have First Nations, but there are always original, maybe
Oh my
Iceland,
gosh.
but there are always knowledge systems that are available to respectfully engage with, and there is an incredible amount of wisdom that is so connected to what we're trying to achieve and so undervalued in our current economy and system. And I think that each of us has that opportunity. And aside from connecting with those knowledge systems, there's also just being able to know that change is not there's a saying like it's not related in time or space, meaning that like you make an action and you hope to get certain outcome and it's not always going to be the outcome that you want,
Mhm.
and that can be very disheartening and it can be quite debilitating. And that, like, running for president of the WTO, I don't know what the full impact of that action was. And I might in the future find out that it had incredible outcomes, or it could have
Yeah.
not, right? It's that's the reality of attempting to make change. You don't know the ripple effects, both positive and negative that can
Right.
happen in the system. And so we need to kind of develop that resilience, which is not to say, oh, you have to be really tough and like constantly fight. It's actually to be able to flow like the water, right? Like a river will move around what's available where it can flow to get to its goal, right? And we need to be a bit like that. So sometimes we make changes and we do interventions and they don't get to the outcome, and it can be pretty disheartening, but at the same time, it's all part of that journey of change. And I really admire people who see this as being a longitudinal intervention, right? Like it's not always in your lifetime or in your role in the company that change is going to happen, but you are a
Right.
link in the chain that's going to get to that better outcome. And that mentality is so much more powerful than complacency or apathy, which a lot of people get to. They get fatigued and they think, oh, what's the point? Climate change is already upon us. We're all going to die anyway. Please don't think like that. Maybe think like that for like 10 minutes.
Right.
When realize that like the future is undefined. We absolutely don't know what's going to happen. We know that we have disrupted the systems that maintain a stable climate on Earth, and that we are continuing to pollute the planet in ways that negatively affects all of us. But there is also always going to be a point where we can make change and we can adapt. And it requires more people contributing to that, and especially creative minds, because these challenges are really design challenges in disguise, right?
Hmm.
How do we
Yeah.
meet people's needs within the means of the planet? How do we find ways of developing our cultures and communities so that they are regenerative and resilient and collaborative and connected? Well, I mean, again, back to some of the Indigenous knowledge systems, so much of what I've learned from engaging with the incredible knowledge systems here in Australia is that the the cultural reality, not even cultural, like the embodied in any Indigenous Australian is a connection to the country that they're from, and that connection it's not even just a stewardship. It's like you are almost spiritually affected. Your physical being is affected, and if the country that you're on or from is being uh, destroyed or disrespected. It's a deep interconnection. And
Yeah.
I think all of us have that. There's a whole thing right now about eco-anxiety or climate anxiety. And we've been doing lots of research. And a lot of that comes from the fact that most of us do physically and spiritually feel affected when the natural world
Hmm.
around us is being destroyed. Like we
Yeah.
actually feel. And so we have to almost take agency over that and realize that that is a really healthy reaction to the reality of the problems that are happening, and that reaction should be a motivator for action. And that action might be taking different steps in your personal life, or it could be, being one of those 10,000 workers who helps make change in a big company, right? So it's really about what you have the capacity to do now, and that changes over time. And we talk about this idea of a sphere of influence, that we all have one. When we're babies, it's just our parents. And as we get
Yeah.
bigger, more people, and we have the capacity to have those ripple effects on the people around us. And, as an educator, I'm sure you've had that experience where
I have.
taking a little bit of time with someone, you literally change their life.
Hmm.
And so we all have that ability in the different things we do. And the more people who are, on that journey of experimentation and exploration, of being, a constructive contributor to building a better future, the more likely we're going to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. That ripple effect for me, like teaching, I don't really know until like 6 years later, 7 years later.
Not related, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
And
and I have the same thing. I don't know. I make projects. It's great to hear that you engage with my tools and stuff. I make projects, do things, and then like years later, I meet someone like, oh, I started this whole business because of this thing I saw you. Like it's mind blowing for me, and
yeah.
also it's incredible because you think it's true, it works. Like I just use creativity as a tool to make change, and I'm informed by my own experiences and my desires to see the world make a better place, the world become a better place for everybody. And so it's incredible to think that that passion, that motivation has impact. And same with you, Eric. Like if you're passionate about teaching and you care about the careers and you want to help kind of, midwife people into a future for themselves that's better, you can have such profound impacts on people's
Yeah.
lives. And it's so incredibly rewarding when you find those things out. But it shouldn't be the motivator, right? Like the motivator
No.
should be that you're able to deliver the learning goals that young people need. And then when you do happen to hear that it's affected them in positive ways, it's always such an incredible
It is.
reward.
It is. It's amazing sometimes. In the beginning, it's more disheartening. Like, oh God, I guess I'm not making any impact on these guys. They're on their phone. Well, speaking of teaching, my favorite question to ask everyone is, and I think you're doing this already with the Unschool, but if you were teaching your dream design class, what would you do? What would you assign?
It's a good question. I would ask my participants to identify a problem in the world that they think is unsolvable, but that they
Hmm.
really want to see fixed. And then
Right.
I would give them the experience of knowing that they have some sort of role over that, and that then challenge them to come up with an intervention that helps to address it, knowing that that might not be that they address it immediately. It's not a one fixed wonder, but that they're contributing to transforming that. And to be fair, that is actually what we teach in the disruptive design method. But
Yes.
in the sense, in the design world, we are not given that time or space to think about, these big things. And sometimes it's a really small intervention that can have a really big effect on those things. But I also think the thing about design students is they're so curious. Like, most people become designers because they like pulling things apart, or
Right.
because they ask all these questions, or because they look at things and they can't stop staring. Like, why does this make me feel that way? And so that curiosity is the most incredible ingredient to foster and to enhance. So, you're talking about them being on their phones. That's because they're probably bored. And so you need to be more interesting than their phones, which
I don't know if
it's
that's
not
possible.
fun.
Right.
Oh, come on. If the stuff on phones is just the same. I mean, I just get the
Yeah.
same dog videos over and over again when I'm on social media. So,
Yeah.
it's like the same Labradors being cute. I don't know why Labradors, but I
Yeah.
seem to get on with them.
Well, I was wondering, just kind of as an aside, when you mentioned about designers and picking things apart, when did you realize that you were probably going to be a designer? Because for me, it's after I watched the movie The Goonies back in the 80s, and I was trying to build all those things that Data had on him. I'm
Funny.
giving away my age here, but when did you kind of realize that you were a designer?
I was in like the last year of high school or something. And a friend of mine was studying graphic design. And I remember having this conversation where he was explaining what design was to me, right? Like, that's what a
Yeah.
lot of design students and graduates have to do to non-designers, explain what design is. And I was like, oh, like, so designers could like fix like remote controls because they're so annoying. Like, I don't
Yes, they
understand why
are.
there's so many buttons. I don't know what it's like. And he was like, yeah, that's a product designer. And I'm like, and toothbrushes? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Well,
I found like a product design program and applied. I got in and I was like, oh, okay. So,
and it's still a project that needs to be solved.
remote controls, seriously. I just can't. I still don't. I was in a hotel a while ago and there was this remote control that was so heavy. It was a super sexy designed remote control. Listeners, you cannot see I'm using air quotes to explain that. It was so sleek, like filling in edges, and it was very long. But as I picked it up, it was like my hand fell to the ground. And I was like, why would you do this? Like, what benefit do we get in making this thing that I'm holding like for a long period of time so heavy? Like, anyway, I could for days really about remote controls. They're
Yeah.
small, they're right. I mean, the buttons that why are so many sound buttons now on the side because of our phones? Do you know how many times I'm like holding a remote control and where's the button to the sound? Like upside.
It's on the side.
And every time I'm like, I don't think I'm dumb, but this thing makes me feel dumb. Like, that's the outcome. There's a global challenge for someone to create a remote control that achieves its functions and also doesn't, make people feel dumb, but possibly is also sustainable. I don't know how you do that.
Well, Leyla, what's next for you?
Working on a lot of really exciting projects at the moment with some really proactive clients who are keen to see the transformation. So I'm working on a really fun open source education project. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, just continuing to find ways of positively poking and provoking big systems levels, and then also at kind of micro levels as well. And yeah, I'm always finding new ways to do things. We're about to release a toolkit on eco anxiety, so it's going to be a free
Oh,
toolkit
perfect.
on just kind of how to reflect and take action on that. So, and yeah, always just looking for different ways to activate other people's agency and help, make change a reality for individuals, but not something that feels like a chore,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Something that you can be really motivated by and feel that even if you have eco anxiety, there's a space for turning that into something positive. And
Yeah.
continuing to do that however I can.
Well, thank you for all the work you've done and the work that you're doing and will be doing, because you're a great inspiration for us. When we got the email that you were going to be on the show, we were much in disbelief because we definitely were inspired by your work, and
Well,
we really
thank you. It's nice
appreciate.
to hear.
Yeah, so we really appreciate you being here.
Excellent. Well, I'm always love a good chat, good yarn, as we say down under. But also great to hear about the work you guys are doing to help, get more designers interested in and activated in sustainability. And as we need more educators doing that as much
And
as
we
they
do.
can in the
Yeah,
structure and with academia.
yeah, for sure. We need more unschools for sure in academia.
Yeah, we totally do. Yeah, maybe that's what we could do. We could just make all universities unschools. That can be unschool 2.0.
Yeah, I love it. We're all in this together.
Exactly. Great to chat with you and meet you today.
This is our calls to action section of the program that we spend some time unpacking the episode and finding climate call to actions, amongst other really important things that the guest discussed. What was your biggest call to action from Leyla's interview?
I think the bit that she said about different generations of designers, that did resonate with me because as a call to action, it kind of made me think back to my experiences with my professors or professionals that I've worked with who were like senior to me, and also my experiences teaching where I was teaching high school students. And I think the differences in mindset is something that is extremely important to acknowledge and also give value to, because just because I'm X years senior doesn't mean that somebody older or younger than me has no knowledge, right? A
Yeah.
lot of people tend to do that, which is like, hey, I'm so many years older than you, I know better. But I
Mhm.
think that it's important to unlearn that and understand that somebody else's methodology could probably be extremely relevant.
Yeah, it's a challenge, right, for someone who has been practicing design for many years, and then they're meeting a lot of new young designers, and they're coming in with all this different ways of thinking about design. And so I think that's a good call to action in terms of this idea of how does these generational designers work towards the common good more effectively without that kind of like maybe even ego getting in the way of, hey, I've worked for 20 years. Come on, kid, and I mean, she has so many really valuable courses on LinkedIn where I think that's a great call to action for if what she said really resonated with you, those classes are going to fill in the blanks from today's interview, and no matter what level of designer you are.
I also really like her handbook, Disruptive Design.
Oh
I
yeah.
think as a
Great.
call to action, it might be pretty fun to read that.
And
And a lot
disrupt
of,
some design more, right? We need to be
yeah.
just more disruptive pretty much.
Oh, yeah. And I think because it specifically focuses on bringing about positive change. And it's interesting to be able to explore what change means, what's positive change, and how it can impact literally everything around you.
Hmm. Yeah, another big call to action for me was when she talked about time scales. It kind of goes in there with generations, right? Where
Oh, yeah.
thinking in longer time scales, that was literally the title of one of our Clemify episodes from, I think, season 2, which was with Dr. Jacqueline Gill. She's
Oh,
a
yeah.
paleoecologist and she works in long time scales. And we need to be thinking longer term as designers. And that really gets into her comments about indigenous cultural practices. If you think about the 7 generations concept,
Yeah.
and being, I guess, as we go forward as a profession, the integration of more of these indigenous knowledge practices into our craft, decolonizing what we're doing. That's a whole other conversation, which, we have done on this program with guests in the past. And she's just stressing it again. It's a big call to action for all of us. And it's a hard one too. Like, how do we
Yeah.
do that it's not going to be tomorrow, right? It's going to be a lot of
Exactly.
work.
And I think it's extremely important today because I feel like with social media and everything else that's happening, it's extremely instant gratification focused.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I do think that thinking long term is going to be a little bit more difficult because
Yeah.
everybody's like, I want everything right now. It could be extremely valuable to sit down and understand that there's something you're doing now that might not see the light of day for the next 5 years, but it's going to have serious impact 10 or 15 years down the line.
Mhm. Yeah. And I mean, we're both in the US, and slowing down is hard for Americans, I would say. And when I have done it, when I have slowed down and really had time to reflect and rest and be more mindful of myself and the space around me, it's been so useful for me, just mentally, physically. And I do think that that is thinking longer term, because you
Oh,
can't
yeah.
just go all the time. You're going to get sick. And especially if you're in our work, we're going to make more mistakes by
Mhm.
not thinking longer term. And she talked about how what affects us and the planet are hidden for the
Uh-huh.
most part.
Oh, yeah.
And I do think that ties in with not thinking longer term. And
Yeah,
that's why,
100%.
yeah, that's why they're hidden so much, because we're not investigating what else is going on.
Mhm.
And we don't have time to, because we're so busy on to the next thing, on to the next
Yeah.
thing.
And
Yeah, of
if you don't see it, you don't realize it's actually happening, right?
course.
I will believe what I see. And that might not always be the case.
Yeah. Well, do you have any more big call to actions from my conversation with her?
I think one thing is probably the fact that she said it's important to be connected to nature. And that is obviously a recurring theme across a lot of that was said through the episodes. But
Yeah.
I do think that there's a lot of value to look into how we automatically think about nature. I think she said one thing that a lot of people today have climate anxiety and frustrations and nervousness surrounding climate action because they're by default in tune with nature. Like on
Yeah.
some subconscious level, they are aware. And I think that what even if you take all of that and look at it logically or very factually, it's just you being in touch with your ecosystem, right? And there's so much that nature is giving to these systems. And I think that is a very small call to action, but it's again larger impact.
Yeah, we heard this from Emma Askew in our first episode this season,
Oh yeah.
and throughout the seasons. And it's hard to do sometimes, because like I said, it's we're going and going, and you don't spend time to really look. That old saying of you have to stop and smell the roses, right? I mean,
Exactly.
it's still it's still an important one today, because the more
Mhm.
we pay attention to that, I think the more in tune we're going to be, and I think we're going to be better at recognizing our place amongst nature. And
Oh yeah,
so,
for sure.
well, it's really been fun unpacking this episode with you, Bhavna.
Oh,
And
yeah.
before we go, where can we find more of Layla's work online?
Everywhere. Honestly, if you type in her name, it'll take you to her website, and we can also drop in the website in the podcast description.
Yes.
And you will have all the resources from her website, her TED Talk, her links to Unschool, the Co-Project Farm, Circular Future, Swivel Skills. And there's also the books that I spoke about earlier, the handbook on disruptive design. There is a lot. Just, I think her website is probably the best page because it's
Yeah.
a landing for everything that she's done.
Yeah, it's for sure. And if you go to LinkedIn Learning, she has many courses there, and all seem very valuable to any level of someone interested in the kind of work that she does. Well, thank you, Bhavna, and I look forward to our next episode.
I was happy to be here. Thank you.
If you'd like podcasts on similar topics from today's episode, you can check out our interview with Roz Godelnik, episode 9 of season 1, and Jamie Beck Alexander, episode 2 of season 3. Thanks for listening. And we want to hear from you. What did you take away from this discussion? We also want to know how you are changing the system. Email us at climifypodcast@gmail.com or connect with us on Instagram at climifypodcast. We would love to read your inspirational stories on the show in upcoming episodes. This program is produced by Cam Birkins with writing and research by Abigail Zook, Jackie Himmel, and Bhavna Bhavani Shankar. Designed by Adam Java. Sound engineering and editing by me, Eric Benson. A special thanks to Mark O'Brien at the Climate Designers and Tink Media for their sage advice to make this season even better than the last. You can find design prompts and more information on all our guests this season at climatedesigners.org/edu/Climify and on Instagram and LinkedIn at Climify Podcast. If you enjoy the work we all do here and you have a spare minute or two, we would truly appreciate it if you left a rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. The more folks reviewing our program, the higher the algorithm pushes us up in the search results. And in turn, the more likely we all could learn how to become climate designers. Next week on Climify, we'll be joined by Heike Peterson. Heike is the founder of Willicious, a cradle-to-cradle certified biodegradable circular yoga fashion company. Well, what's so special about their fabrics? Their fabrics are GOTS certified organic cotton. They use no toxic chemicals or pesticides to make. They're hypoallergenic. They're biodegradable elastane, and they're cradle-to-cradle certified platinum. Of course, as I mentioned before, they are circular. They'll be returned to the earth with leaving no trace behind. And because Willicious is based in Europe, all the fabrics are woven and made in Europe. You can learn more about Heike and her company at willicious.com.
I think my passion is just to create products that are good for you and for the planet, because this is also what I've learned now. Sustainability is an evolution, and also how I perceive my product. So actually the products that we do are not only good for the environment because they're safe. My whole supply chain is certified by cradle to cradle, from picking to the warehouse, and also the labels, the yarns, everything, the dyes that we use. Also, all the supplies need to be certified. So this is how we achieve a product which is not toxic, and we have the gold level of cradle to cradle, and even for material health we have platinum. And
that's amazing.
Yeah. So, but what it creates is just a product that is really safe for the environment, that can return to nature safely. But what is good for the environment is also good for you, especially with exercise clothing. It's so important that you have a product, you sweat, it's close to your skin. So it's good if the product also is so it in essence is also good for you.